Hi, this is Lippy. I'm a shamanic healer, and in today's video, we are going to discuss discernment, what it is, what happens when you don't use it, and how you can develop it. Now, if you look at the dictionary definition of discernment, I looked up Merriam-Webster, quote, it says, discernment is the quality of being able to grasp and comprehend what is obscure. Discernment is a crucial component of intuition, and there's an old fairy tale which is there in this wonderful book, which I strongly recommend for anyone who's on the spiritual path, and or even if you're not on the spiritual path. It's an amazing book by this amazing woman called Clarissa Pinkola Estes, and the book is called Women Who Run with the Wolves. And one of the stories, the fairy tales in this book, tells the tale of Vasilisa the Wise. And her story is the story of how developing intuition is seen as a path of spiritual initiation. So basically, in the story, Vasilisa, this little girl, has to complete all these tasks which have been given to her by a very frightening witch-like creature called the Baba Yaga. And it's very, very simple. If she completes the task, she gets to live. If she fails to complete the task, or she is unable to do the tasks to the satisfaction of the Baba Yaga will kill and eat the little girl. So throughout the story, she uses her intuition to complete these tasks. And one of the tasks that she is asked to complete is a task of discernment. And how does she develop discernment? So she's given a task of separating the bad corn from the good corn and the poppy seeds from the dirt. And in the process of separating this from that, using very fine discrimination, using her intuition to discern between the good corn and the bad corn and the poppy seeds from the dirt, she is seen as taking a path of a spiritual path or an initiation into developing her intuition and her discernment. Now, how can discernment be helpful in our day-to-day lives? I think the first thing that comes to mind is, as the Merriam-Webster says, it's about the quality of being able to suss out, to nose out the obscure. The first area that I would look at is when you develop your discernment, and when your discernment becomes very strong and very fine, it goes a long way in helping you to nose out, to suss out people's true intentions. And I know that, when I say people's true intentions, sussing out people's true intentions is one of the toughest things anyone would ever have to do, because you don't really ever know what's going on in somebody's body, mind, soul. Even if you're psychic, right? So I disagree with this idea that, psychics know everything, and because you're psychic, you are guaranteed know for sure what's going on with somebody, because you don't really. You can see a portion or an aspect or a component of something, or somebody's psyche, or somebody's non-verbal energy, so to speak. But it's only a portion. But that's where your discernment comes into the picture. Because when you have discernment, you are able to see, maybe see what's really going on behind the facade. So a few weeks back, or was it a few months, I don't remember, I was chatting with an old friend of mine, and this woman is one of the humblest, the opposite of arrogant people that I know. I've known her for several years, and she had an unusual rant that day, and she said to me, my husband is tired of me wanting to win every argument. And I was really taken aback, because knowing this friend of mine, she's not normally an argumentative person. So I was really surprised when she said that. And Of course, I know her well, and I am more easily able to read her intentions than I would, say, a stranger. But I realize that, if I look at, if I go with the idea that people who are argumentative or who want to win every argument are self-centered or arrogant, then it could easily look like, or maybe it easily looked like that to her husband, that, oh, this woman is being arrogant and she's being, oh, how self-centered and wanting to win every argument. But when I looked deep at what was going on with her, I realized, no, actually, this friend of mine is a survivor of abuse. She was abused for several years, and one of the ways in which she was abused was her voice was suppressed. It was oppressed or suppressed a lot. And I felt that when she was trying to win every argument, she was coming from a space of, I think she finally felt safe to be able to voice her opinions and voice what she really felt about something. And she didn't want to lose that. She hadn't been able to do that in years. And I think, that I believe that that is the space that she was coming from. But if you apply the idea that, every argumentative person is arrogant, or every shy person, for example, must be a really sweet soul, or the idea that everyone who looks happy and joyful doesn't have any issues and their life is perfect, then you're not really looking at what's happening below the scenes. You're not really looking at the obscure. You're looking at the superficial. And discernment is about looking at the obscure. That doesn't mean, so there are cases of people who are arrogant and controlling and want to win every argument. So some people really are like that. And some shy people are really, really sweet and wonderful. But I also know a lot of shy people who are covert narcissists. And, there are people who look very happy and joyful and they have a wonderful sense of humor. But that doesn't necessarily mean their life is perfect. And then there are some people whose life is, well, not perfect, but, they have a pretty good life. So you can't really say when you make these snap blanket-like judgments, and that's where your ability to discern comes in, is to look at what is obscure. Now, the second area in your life where you can use discernment, where it's very useful, is to be able to differentiate between two or more things that look very similar but are not quite the same. So let me explain. So I have here 2 eggs. Now, I know my camera is HD, but I don't think it's so HD that we can go very, very close into looking at the eggs. I don't know if we can do that, but primarily, if you look at these two, they look identical. They don't look, different at all. Discernment is being able to look at something, or look at two things that are identical and saying, wait a minute, okay, so they look alike, but are they really alike? And then going, like, literally with a fine-tooth comb into every detail to be able to tell in what ways they're not alike. So I don't know if you can see that on the camera, but although these eggs look alike, one of them has peculiar markings, which this one has peculiar markings. I don't know if you can see that there, but even if you can't, don't just take my word for it. And this one has only one marking, whereas this has about 4 or 5 peculiar markings. So they're identical, but they're similar, but they're not exactly the same. Now, where do you apply that in your day-to-day life? So, this got me thinking. I was thinking earlier today about the time when I visited this beautiful place called Sikkim. And I remember I was fascinated with the wild mushrooms that grow there. And some of these mushrooms are, of course, they're poisonous. And I know that the locals eat mushrooms as part of their diet. So one of the questions I had was, hey, how do you know which mushroom to eat? Like, how do you know which mushroom is poisonous and which isn't? Because you want to find out the hard way, right? So I asked one of the locals, like, how do you figure this out? And he said, well, there's a village elder who does that. And I said, oh, how interesting. So how does he figure it out? And he says, well, he just knows. He's been doing this for a long, long time, and he just knows. And looking at those mushrooms, I was like, wow, that would be a really, really tough task to just know, because many of the varieties look very similar to each other. So many of the poisonous ones look very identical to the poisonous ones. So you'd have to have, if you just know, you'd have to have some very strong discernment there. I was like, wow, okay, that's really fascinating. And, going back to the Vasilisa story, it was very interesting because they say in the story that asking her to separate the mildewed corn from the good corn is also learning how to separate medicine. And the reason for that is because in some spiritual cultures, mildewed corn is apparently a hallucinogen which is used in medicine. So it's not that it's bad corn necessarily. It's like, so you have the good corn, which is a particular type of medicine, and you have the bad corn or the mildewed corn, which is another kind of medicine. Now, I know that in day-to-day life, most likely you're not going to be called upon to like find the difference between similar looking poisonous mushrooms or hallucinogenic corn. But there is a lot of value to be able to discern between what looks similar, but or two things that look similar but may not be the same. For example, if you are part of the spiritual community, you can develop the ability to discern between modalities. So you may have two modalities that you may want to work with, and they look very similar. And at least in terms of benefits, you're like, wow, well, I could benefit from this and I could benefit from this. So how do I choose? Like, what's the difference between this? How do I choose between X healer and X Y healer, or X therapist and Y therapist is another example. Or even choosing opportunities. So you may have two amazing job opportunities that come your way, and they look pretty similar, and they both sound really good, and you're like, wow, I really got lucky. I got people who don't have a job, and I have like 2 job offers now. But how do you know? They look similar, but you can't quite tell. And that's where your discernment comes in, because you go in and literally to separate what looks similar but is not the same is like what I did with the eggs. So you literally have to go really, really close with that fine-toothed comb and go like, okay, let me go through this. Let me go through this and really go deep into that if you want to use or develop this part of your discernment. Now, what happens when we are not discerning? What are the consequences? Does it matter at all? In my experience, it matters a huge amount, because first of all, if you don't develop your discernment, you are in danger of using cliches, memes, ideas in a blanket-like fashion, which can be very detrimental both to yourself and to others. And nowhere have I seen this happen more than in the spiritual self-help community. So I keep saying this, I know I go on and on about it, but it's because it really bothers me, and I constantly see these cliches running around which people are accepting blindly, which are half-truths, where no discernment is being applied to these cliches, and they are being used in a blanket-like fashion, and some of the results of that are pretty disastrous. Cliches such as, it takes 2 to tango, there are no victims, you create your own reality. These are half-truths. We really have to go deeper and look at, on a case-to-case basis. They apply in some situations, they don't apply in certain situations. Everything is not always the way it appears, and we owe it to ourselves to go a little bit deeper and look at, when does this apply and when does it not apply? And a lot of people have been hurt by therapists, by healers, and by well-meaning friends who have read tons and tons of spiritual books, or gone to yoga class, or become meditators or whatever, and they're running around with these cliches but with no discernment. Now, the second way in which it can affect you or others if you haven't developed your discernment is where, if you are not able to see the obscure, if you're not able to go below or what lies beneath, like that Michelle Pfeiffer film a couple of years ago. If you're not able to do that, and you tend to focus more on what you see above the surface, you can put yourself or somebody else in danger of letting a predatory person into your life, and you would not know this is a predatory person till it was too late, because superficially they look wonderful, they're charming, they're fun, they're sweet, they're kind, but what is going on beneath is a whole other story. And this is how a lot of people who haven't developed the discernment end up becoming prey for, say, cluster B personalities, or this is how a lot of people end up even voting for leaders who they think are wonderful but are actually dangerous fascist leaders. This is how anyone, and this can happen to anyone. I remember I had a therapist who I went to, who I thought was wonderful, and I was very impressed with her. But thankfully, I started to see some obscure stuff. So there's nothing on the surface that was wrong. Really, there wasn't. But there was stuff going on behind the scenes, which I used my discernment to start looking at. And there were some little red flags which weren't obvious, but slowly they started to become obvious. And to my horror, I realized that she was actually a covert narcissist. And it was very scary. Of course, I cut the therapy away immediately. But it was very frightening for me. And it's interesting, I have to say this. In a way, anyone who's ever been narcissistically abused may probably agree with me, I don't know. But if you have been narcissistically abused, you believe me, you develop discernment as a superpower. It's a superpower you develop from being abused, because it really helps you to see the obscure in ways you would have otherwise never seen. The third way in which, if you don't develop your discernment, you could have issues with, and that is that you're very easy to gaslight. When you don't have the discernment, when you're not able to trust your inner sense of reality, it's very easy for a gaslighter to distort your reality, and you would very easily fall for propaganda, which can be both harmful to you and those around you. Now, I've been going on and on about discernment. I guess the next thing that you would like to know is, well, okay, if it's so important, how do we develop discernment? Now, I'm going to be making a whole other video on developing discernment, because it's actually a very vast topic, and I talk a lot and like to go deep into things. But for now, I can give you a head start. And the first thing that I would ask you to do is to start by just listening to your intuition. And I really do believe that everyone has their own unique intuitive voice, or a guiding voice. If you don't like the word intuition, if you are guided by something and you don't like to call it intuition, that's fine too. Whatever it is that guides you from within and has been proven to be right on most occasions for you is what you need to start honing into and developing, and giving it that respect and giving it that sort of boost, so that it comes for you again and again. It comes to help you again and again. The second thing that I would say, and I have two-part video about this, is about emotional hygiene, because when you are not emotionally clean, it will cloud your senses, it will cloud your discernment, it will cloud your intuition. And I strongly believe that when you keep emotional hygiene, and I will copy paste the links to the video on the emotional hygiene videos that I have in the comment section below, you will see that when you have that emotional hygiene in place, then, as we say in shamanism, it becomes easier to see with all three eyes. So these are the two ways: listening to your intuition or your inner guide, or whatever you want to call it, more, giving it more importance, understanding its role in your life, and keeping yourself emotionally clean, being honest with yourself, so that your lens is less foggy and you're able to see, because discernment is about seeing, and seeing fine, like through the eye of the needle fine. Now, coming back to the story, what happened to Vasilisa? Did she get finish her discernment tasks, or did she get killed and eaten by the Baba Yaga? So you see, Vasilisa was a wise little girl and she had a secret. So when the Baba Yaga told her that, you better separate the mildew corn from the clean corn and the poppy seeds from the dirt, and you have to finish these piles by tomorrow morning, because if not, I'm going to eat you, you're going to die. Vasilisa used her secret, and her secret was a little doll which told her when to turn left or when to turn right, when to speak and when to keep silent, that kind of thing. And the doll just said to her that, what, don't worry about it, just sleep. I will sort everything out. And in the morning when Vasilisa got up, sure enough, true to her word, the doll had sorted the piles, and Vasilisa lived for, I don't know how long she lived, but she lived. The Yaga didn't eat her apparently. So the moral of the story, the doll in the story is supposed to represent the inner voice, the intuition. Sometimes the more we listen to our intuition, the more we will develop discernment. But when we are in the early stages of doing that and we don't have the discernment, like Vasilisa, we can just hand the task over to our intuition and go to sleep, and maybe it will sort the piles for us. Thank you for listening to this video. I hope you will get back to me with any questions you may have about this, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Have a beautiful week. Goodbye.